Good morning and a warm welcome to Svenska Spel's webinar on responsible gambling development and also the importance of sharing knowledge within the gambling industry. My name is Sabina von Gafke and I have the pleasure to be moderating today's webinar that aims to highlight the importance of developing responsible gambling measures and also the importance of collaboration within the industry and the evidence-based preventive work of problem gambling. Now, in recent years, focus on responsible gambling has increased within the industry, particularly as a result of harder regulations and also requirements that the gambling companies take action to prevent their customers from developing gambling addictions. And when talking about gambling responsibility, it's not only referring to the industry's customers, but also looking at the negative consequences gambling problems can create for society as a whole. And with this webinar, Svenska Spel hopes to open up for conversation and dialogue to share insights and knowledge in the field with the aim to really make a positive contribution to the industry's combined work on responsible gambling. Now, today's webinar will run until approximately 9:30. We're also going to have, in the meantime, a 30-minute panel. And I really want to encourage all of our viewers that you engage in the panel by sending in questions, as I will be raising as many questions as I have time from our viewers at the end of the panel. We'll also be posing some questions during today's webinar that will come up in your screens, and it will be also interesting to get your opinions and feedback on the questions. Now, to do this, you have to take up your smartphones and go to mentimeter.com. So if you take up your smartphones, go to mentimeter.com, and when you're there, you use the code 48053668. It should also be visible in your screens now. And then when you come into Mentimeter, that's where we'll be posing questions to you and also where you can send in your questions. And by now you should already have a question, a simple one to start off with. And the question is, what do you do for a living? And with that, I'd like to kick off this webinar by saying a warm welcome to Svenska Spel's CEO and President, Patrik Hoffbauer, and also Sara Lindholm, who is President of Svenska Spel's Independent Research Council. So good morning and a warm welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
So Patrik, I wanted to start off with you by asking why Svenska Spel sees it as such an importance to support research.
Yes. Thank you, Sabina. And I also want to take the opportunity to welcome you all to this today's seminar. Well, it all started out for a past decade ago when we saw that there were no research available for problem gambling, and then at that time we established this research team, an independent one, and we saw that we have our tools to protect the customers for harmful gambling, and we have also how we use the tools that we have to develop our games. But then we saw also that we were missing some part, and the missing part was get more fact, more evidence based on it from the research. And that was the background why we started this. And since the start, we have invested more than 60 million SEK. And we have also a professorship in Lund, where we support also with 2.5 million SEK per year. So in total 60 million then is invested into this. And this is, of course, we want to have more information so we can be even better in how we can protect our customers. And we also want to do a third thing, is that is to share this information to the whole industry sector, so we can together be better in this work. And we see also that if we can share it and improve it in general, we also create a much more sustainable gambling sector industry, both in a long and a short term, which also then is, of course, good for the society as such.
Definitely. And looking at now, we're here today at this webinar to really look at the research and also look at the different preventive work that is being done. Why was it important to hold this webinar today?
Yeah, and that is exactly the third part, how can we share the information that we can get, out of the research, so more can use it, so we can get a better gambling sector as such, and help the customers, to navigate and protect them for harmful gambling.
And Sarah, you're chair of Svenska Spel's Independent Research Council, who are today releasing the first report, the Responsible Gambling Report today. Tell us, what is the significance of this support from the gambling industry?
Well, it has made a huge impact for the research society in Sweden. This is a generally underfunded research area. So by this support from Svenska Spel, we have managed to increase the number of researchers in Sweden, independent researchers in academic institutions. So that can also contribute to the global research area. It's a global disease. It's not a Swedish or Nordic disease. And the research work we do here can also benefit other people in other parts of the world. So it's made a huge impact. Young researchers struggle to survive in this field. So by this support, we have managed to grow this community.
And can research benefit, also what Patrick mentioned, from the increased collaboration within the gambling industry in the work for responsible gambling? Is that sort of the essence of it?
Yeah. I believe that academia in general need to collaborate more extensively with other collaborators. And when it comes to responsible gambling, we know a lot about, the prevalence, the health effects of this, but there are still a lot of gaps in the knowledge area in terms of prevention that Patrick mentioned. What are the tools and how can we evaluate the existing tools, and how can we develop more tools also to make sure that we use the right tools to protect the customers in this respect. But we also need to understand more about the environment surrounding these gamers or gamblers. We also need to understand more about treatment. This is fairly much an unrecognized and untreated group in the clinical setting. So with the support and collaboration with gambling industry, we can also get hold of more data, which can be transferred into knowledge, and the knowledge can also be transferred into new policies and also eventually benefit the whole society. So I think it's critical.
And also bring all the stakeholders to the table. Patrick, before we continue, would you like to add anything to that?
No, I think it's important. I mean, we and in the industry, we need more fact evidence-based, so we can be even better in protecting our customers. And for us, research has been so valuable in that perspective, because we can take examples of what we do and then put it into research, get more fact, make more evidence in it, and we can then be even better. And for sharing this now in the industry, I think that is the next step and very important.
And we're definitely going to be sharing those knowledge and insights during the panel.
Yes.
And I will be inviting both of you at the end to really give a conclusion and summary of today's webinar. So thank you in the meantime.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, it's now time to move on to the next item of today, Svenska Spel's first responsible gambling report for 2020, that, as I mentioned, is launched and released today and will be a yearly report going forward. And with me to talk more about this, I have Kajsa Nylander, who is Head of Sustainability at Svenska Spel. Good morning, Kajsa.
Good morning.
And I can see you already have the report
I have
there in
here.
your hand. So tell us a bit briefly about the work behind the report.
Like Patrick said, we see sharing of the experience and the knowledge that we have as part of our social responsibility. And we want gambling to be entertaining and something positive. But as we all know, there is a downside to this. And we want to do everything that we can to reduce the risks of gambling in the society. So we share what the work that we do and what we know in different ways. We publish blogs and reports and organize webinars such as this one. And since this year marks the 10th anniversary of the Independent Research Council, we decided to publish the Responsible Gambling Report. So I have it both in English and in Swedish. This is a Swedish printed version. And in this report, we share the work behind the scenes of our testing and analyzing of responsible gambling. But we also share the work that we do together with or how we support research, because academia is very important for us. It provides us with a deeper understanding of what triggers problems and also what we can do to prevent the problems.
And you, of course, you've already mentioned it a bit, but sort of dive a bit deeper. What do you hope to achieve with the report?
Well, since, like Sarah mentioned, it's a young field of research, and all of us work a lot with the testing and trying to get evidence for that what we do actually has the effects that we want to accomplish. So we think that if we start to share more in the industry, we will also become better faster, all of us.
And also sort of the sharing knowledge is a bit of the red theme today, and
Yeah.
also what Patrick and even Sarah mentioned. And sort of this decision to really share this knowledge in a report. Was it a difficult one to make, or was it a very obvious one?
Well, we don't see the responsible gambling that we do as a unique selling point or something that we do exclusively for our own customers. We want to minimize the problems of gambling in the society as a whole. So it was not a difficult decision. We want to collaborate more and take joint responsibility with the industry.
Now you have the paper version there, but if
Yeah.
our viewers would like to maybe download it online, where do they go?
You can download it from our webpage in English and Swedish. I hope from today, later today, if it's not there already, because it was finished last Friday, so we're moving quick here. But I think it's there today.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much
Yeah.
for the work that you do,
Thank
and thank
you.
you for joining us today, Kajsa.
Thanks.
Thank you. And before we continue with our panel session, let's take a look at the first question that we posed to you viewers. An easy one, but let's hear, what do you do for a living? And there were a variety of examples to choose from, and we can see them here: in politics, gambling, research, media, other. And of course, the dominating part is 59% is within gambling, and then we have other, and then we have research. So hopefully this is all vital to all of you. And let's also take a second poll question that we'll look at the results later, and that is, should the gambling industry increase collaboration in work to develop responsible gambling measures? A bit correlated to what Kajsa and I just spoke about. So while you think about that, we're going to start this panel session. That's going to be around 30 minutes. Don't forget to send in your questions, because I'll try and raise as many as I can at the end of the panel. Now, this is a panel with representatives from some of the stakeholders within the industry. So we have the research part of it, we have the gambling industry, of course, and we also have representations from the customers. And the panel is about to discuss the opportunities, the pitfalls, the research into gambling addiction, and of course, what we've already mentioned, the importance of really sharing knowledge within the industry and what that implies. So with that, I want to say a warm welcome. I have three of my panelists joining us via link. We have Maris Catania, who is head of responsible gambling and research at Kindred, who is joining us from sunny Malta, I think. Welcome.
Hi, welcome.
And then we have Axel Lyckberg, who is responsible gambling specialist at Svenska Spel, who is joining us from Sweden. Good morning to you too, Axel. And then we have Anders Håkansson, who is consultant physician and also professor of addiction medicine at Lunds Universitet. So welcome to you as well, Anders. And I'm also joined by someone in the studio. So we're more than just me, and it's Rickard Lönn. You are advisor for responsible gambling and also a former professional handball player. So warm welcome to you too.
Thank you.
I thought I would start out with you, Maris, and sort of have two questions in one that you hopefully can give us some insight on. And that is, how does Kindred work with research and development on responsible gambling? And also, what is Kindred's stance on sharing knowledge about responsible gambling with other companies?
So within Kindred, we've been doing research for quite a while. But I think one of the main areas that we need to also focus on is not just sharing research, but then employing it in your work. So when it comes to sharing research, we do with Mark Griffiths, Jonathan Park, with Karolinska Institute, but we also sponsor a lot of PhDs, which I think that's quite a good stance to take, because you have students who can focus entirely and have a new vision around gambling. I think when it comes to the industry, something that we need to keep in mind is that some research before would be done through students in gambling labs, whereas the industry has a lot of information and data, which is real gambling data. When it comes to sharing, it's not just, publishing the data as well, but making sure that all your processes are based on research. And something that I think is very good and unique to Kindred is that we don't only share this, but we also invite experts to the office to see what we're doing is proper. And when I mean by experts, even people with they are reform problem gamblers or affected others, because then you can really apply the theory, the research, and the practical solutions to minimize harm. And to your second questions, when it comes to sharing, we also take a different stance. So it's not just publishing the research, which is usually peer-reviewed, but we also make sure that it's part and parcel on our website, and it's also easily understandable. So if you go on our Kindred website, for example, you see that a lot of research is translated into a more easy to understand for everyone, not just someone with an academic background.
Thank you. And we're going to dive more into that later during the panel. But I'd like to go over to you, Axel. You're a responsible gambling expert and also a data analyst at Svenska Spel. Tell us about your approach to development work on responsible gambling.
Thank you. Yeah, so we have the ambition at Svenska Spel to set a good example in all our responsible gambling solutions. No matter if it's a regulatory requirement or our own development of new tools and methods, the solution should not only meet the requirement, they should also work as good as possible. So our main objective is, of course, to prevent problems. We want fewer gamblers to experience problems and fewer high-risk players. And working day to day to make this happen, we are really inspired by scientific methodology. Typically, when we develop new tools or interventions, we launch them first in pilots using control groups and possibly different varieties of possible solutions. This enables us to pinpoint the best working solution as well as evaluating actual effects. And of course, when working with new ideas, as Maris was into, we also try to interview gamblers and other stakeholders. But most importantly, the group of gamblers we are trying to focus on with the given intervention. So our responsible gambling framework works adaptively with the customer's risk of possible gambling problems. You can say that we work in responsible gambling in 3 tiers. At the base level, we work with awareness and interest, with broad communication and knowledge-raising efforts with all customers. And for example, this is trying to get customers to set suitable limits and knowing which tools and help are available. And moving on, for customers who have an elevated risk of developing gambling problems, we work with insight and motivation. So these customers receive more communication to ensure that they are in control of their gambling and don't experience harm. Finally, we work with helping and supporting gamblers who experience negative consequences of their behavior to take action. And this can be by guiding them to self-exclusion and seeking help, but also limiting gamblers who have lost their self-control.
Thank you, Axel. And bringing it back to the studio, I'd also like to involve you, Richard. So you're a former professional handball player, as I mentioned. And in the report, you actually also talk about your own gambling addiction previously, and now you're helping Svenska Spel to really develop their responsible gambling work. So share with us briefly, your experience and how that can help increase expertise within the gambling industry and maybe also give them new tools when it comes to responsible gambling.
Yeah. My experiences give me another perspective on things, and I can see it with a different set of eyes. So I give a lot of feedback on, example, communication to the customers who are starting to develop problems or even have problems. And I know how hard it is to reach someone who is in that situation with that problem, with high debts and the future is not looking so bright for them. So I try to help Svenska Spel reach those people and how they can use language that are non-threatening to them and start a dialogue and make them stop and reflect on their own behavior. So it's a big part of the I help Svenska Spel with now, and my vision and why I'm doing this is because I know firsthand the consequences of an addiction to gambling, and it's nothing that I would wish upon my worst enemy to experience. And the relationship with family and girlfriends and everything that gets affected by this addiction. So I'm at that point now, almost 5 years with no gambling, and I want to contribute to a better industry that takes more responsibility in a sustainable way.
And I think it's so important to really have people who have the experience and who have gone through it, because that's also the way you can communicate with people who are currently in the situation. So that's really important.
Yeah.
Anders, bringing you into the conversation, you've been researching gambling addiction for years in your profession. In what way is data and experience from gambling companies that we're talking about now helpful for researchers? And how do you sort of contribute to strengthening the preventive work that you do?
Well, I think that kind of data is extremely important because we know that, well, gambling, what gambling operators have in their data is the actual product, the actual behavior. And there you don't have the limitation that you always have when you detect problems with self-report surveys, or if you do it in any specific setting, like a clinical setting where you only see the people that you see, but a gambling operator has the possibility to collect data from everybody who gambles and to detect also changes in their gambling. We know that, and that's a very, very important source of information, because we know that treatment seeking, for example, is low, or at least it's limited, and it happens too late in the process often. And therefore, a gambling operator's data will make it possible to look at problems and to evidence-based methods much earlier in the process, and even detect the beginning of the process of developing a gambling problem, and not just seeing the problem when it is established already. So I think gambling operators' data sources are extremely useful to research. And also what I really see is needed is evidence-based methods. What should a gambling operator do? What methods do we know work in order to detect the people in need for help? And how do we give them early interventions even before the problem gets too severe? So that kind of, it's like evidence-based medicine or preventive medicine. So we need that kind of really hard data on, like, saying that this method works and this one doesn't.
Thank you, Anders. And Marius, bring it back to you, because Kindred Group has implemented a zero vision for harmful gambling by 2023. Could you tell us more about how Kindred actually defines when you talk about revenue from problem or unhealthy gambling that is sort of associated with the measurements?
Of course. So primarily what we did was we started reporting on customers that would have closed their account for addiction, for example, or self-excluded. So the more customers that are at the end of their journey, but also we translated the DSM-5 criteria to online gambling. So we approached every DSM, and the DSM, sorry for just taking it for granted, everyone could understand. The DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is used in psychiatry and psychology. So we're trying really to bridge the social work aspect, the social health, onto online gambling. So once we translated these, we aimed to report the highest risk as well there. But at the same time, by having this vision, by reporting this percentage, we can really work in order to decrease it. So not just prevent people from getting to the point of a problem, but prevent people from experiencing any harm because of gambling.
And speaking, like you said, sort of there is a percentage tied to this measurement. What sort of lies behind the strategy of Kindred actually, revealing this percentage of revenue that is derived from harmful gambling to the rest of the industry?
I think it's healthy to have this conversation. It's healthy to be able to report and see this is how much money that did derive from someone who is experiencing harm. And it's the only way that we can really say we're going to commit to 0%. We can't just give a statement like that and not measure it. So measuring something is, I think, the most fundamental thing to do. And also it helps the dialogue then to discuss with different researchers and treatment centers and universities we have this aim, we have this issue, and this is what we want to diminish.
And just to become a bit practical, what would be the sort of practical consequences of when a person, a gambling addicted person, actually hits breaking point in the system?
So at the point, how the system works, it will detect people who are even showing the slight issues from harmful gambling, and it depends on the risks that you're classified on how we will approach it. So, for example, if you're detected at medium risk, we have one of our trained analysts who will look into your account, who will see what is the best approach. As one of the other panelists mentioned, it's quite difficult to get someone to change their behavior if it's too much, where gambling has already taken over. So in those cases, the measurements might be a bit more harsh. We might need to close the option for you to deposit further until you have a proper talk with us. There may be cases where we say, our relationship has to terminate now, and we refer these people to treatment. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's quite a hectic task, but we see that the benefits will always outweigh the more difficult case scenarios that we have.
And Anders, coming back to you with your line of profession, with your research experience, what are your opinions about this initiative? I mean, is it relevant, the way it's measured, and how should gambling companies maybe react to the information that is also generated from this?
I think the exact nature of this initiative, I mean, it has to, in my opinion, it's very important that such initiatives and such methods are published and peer-reviewed and kind of discussed in the scientific communities. I mean, there may be everything is about where you put the cutoff and how you decide to define your measures of detection. So I think that's an academic process to get that evidence-based. But the overall ambition, of course, is interesting, and it's I think what matters is what you do and that you know that you're doing the right thing. It's very relevant that if you detect a problem, depending on what degree the problem has, you should act differently, and there are definitely problems where you should give a motivational intervention where you simply advise a person not to gamble anymore, and there are phases where you may not have to do that, but you have to give some kind of early advice, kind of give some input on reflecting on your own gambling if the problem is just beginning to grow. So again, evidence-based methods is important to publish, to test those methods, and to look at whether this one works and whether it may work better than a different one.
And Richard, I'd like to include you in the conversation, both with your background, having had the addiction, but also now working to prevent it. What's your take on Kindred's initiative?
First of all the transparency I think is a good thing. But I have to agree with Anders here about what he said about early detection and evidence-based strategies that you can apply as soon as possible for the person, because both mentioned when it goes too far, it's so hard to get that person in treatment, and it's a long road ahead to have a normal life again. So the better we can be with the evidence-based research on the strategies, how to, we see in the system, here we see a change of behavior, and then we put in efforts there and see how we can help that person not go too far. So in my mind, it's no doubt that early detection is a huge key to prevent people from start to get an addiction in the first place. So that's my take on it, and I think that's incredibly important.
So early detection, I presume that was not something that happened in your case?
No.
So bearing that wisdom flag to sort of the ones who are already there. Early detection. Now, before we continue the panel discussion, I just wanted to go back to the poll question that we asked our viewers. The initial one that was, should the gambling industry increase collaboration in work to develop responsible gambling measurements? So let's see, I think there's a union yes here in the panel, but let's see what our viewers say. And there's a unanimous yes, 88% think that there should be a collaboration and more work on responsible gambling. So that's really interesting. And let's also pose a third question to all of our viewers. Should gambling companies regularly account for the share of revenues from problem gambling? So that was a third question. So Axel, I'd like to include you in the conversation now. What is Svenska Spel's stance on the possibility of accounting for unhealthy revenues, as we spoke about?
Yeah, so I think it's a good initiative in the way that this kind of business code really addresses the core problem with the gambler's health in center. So at Svenska Spel, we are in favor of transparency when it comes to these kind of measures as unhealthy revenue. And we would like to see a standardized industry-wide measurement to make comparisons between companies possible. So this model must be based on one common definition of unhealthy revenue, we think. And we are hoping that this can be reached within the gambling associations, such as SPER, Swedish Gambling Association, that we are a part of. If you ask me, I believe that a good starting point for finding a credible common definition of unhealthy revenue can be to look at the tools and methods used in population studies on gambling, such as Svealogs here in Sweden, for example.
Yeah, I mean, a standardized measurement system, I'm sure, is something that the whole industry, Maris is also nodding her head, would conclude to. And Anders, what impact would it have for you, looking out of a research basis, if gambling companies, improved their collaboration in the development of responsible gambling work?
It would have great value because, again, I think we should bear in mind that this is the best source possible of looking at the actual problem developing, and there's actually no other source that can give that kind of give information with the same validity. I mean, self-report surveys from the population are important, but they can never fill that gap. And again, clinical research also can't. So it's really the best possible way of providing data. Again, also, I think we should remember that countries have very diverse gambling markets. What people gamble differs. The role of online gambling is different in different settings. So it will be important to have these kinds of strategies and these kinds of initiatives in many settings. I think each setting we can learn a lot from other countries, but each setting has its own importance. And I think we should be very active in finding also for Sweden, highly Swedish specific interventions as well, because gambling markets are so diverse.
So really having a cultural aspect, even though it's a unanimous measuring system. And Maris,
I think.
And Maris, so what's your view on the possibility of improving the collaboration that we're talking about on responsible gambling? Do you see that coming?
Sure. I would just like to point out before, obviously, the proactive detection was being mentioned, and that's something that Kindred is quite dedicated to. And we've always been very much sharing this information through sustainable gambling conferences, but also if you go on our website, there is a video explaining exactly one of the algorithms and how it works. And we have invited researchers, so any researcher can look into the system and understand how it works. And we want to do this in a way where we can also publish these things. Something which makes me, I think, in a very special position is that I also employ the hat of a researcher, as I'm a PhD student under the guidance of Mark Griffiths. So from that perspective, I can see both worlds, and I can also try to employ what is the best approach. But there's always the sharing involved. And that's why we work with different universities. And we always welcomed universities. So any student or any professor that wanted our data, we were always quite welcome to do this. And when it comes to the interventions, I agree as well. Of course, we need to go into the very start of the problem before it even becomes a problem. You need to start educating customers at a very early point, not just set a limit, but set a reasonable limit. If it gets too much, open up. And these things are also done because that's the only way you can really diminish the harmful revenue. By reporting the harmful revenue, it's not a commitment to just that part of the equation. It's a commitment to all of the equation. Sorry, I missed your question because I was going on to...
No, it was, I mean, you touched upon it well. It was more, your view on the possibility of really improving the collaboration within the industry. That's sort of the core of the discussion.
Yeah, it's not just between us, not just between the industry. And I think it's very important. And I remember as well at times where I reached out to different operators and the discussions were not permitted. So I'm really happy to see this, because if I had to be like 5 years ago or 6 years ago, a lot of these discussions would have been shut down. But again, highlighting that getting researchers, academics, reformed problem gamblers, and the affected others. We need to focus as well on the people who were affected because of someone's problem, because they can give us a new view compared to others.
And luckily we are now in the space where collaboration is up in the air, and discussions like this webinar of Svenska Spel is also opening up that playing field. And Axel, how is Svenska Spel working with measurements methods to really prevent and counteract gambling problems? I mean, are there any threshold values that you apply to this?
Yeah, so we conduct measurements on several levels to know that our responsible gambling is working. To start with, each initiative is evaluated against the objectives we hope to achieve. So perhaps we want, as an example, we want a dialogue to result in gamblers planning their gambling sessions better and resulting in fewer deposits during a gambling session. Then the number of deposits is, of course, the behavior we want to measure before and after to compare this to a control group. At an operations level, moving up, there are several measurements we can keep track of over time to see that the responsible gambling framework is working day to day. So last year, for example, our players answered almost 100,000 self-assessment tests in our systems, and our responsible gambling counselors completed 6,800 phone calls, as another example. And we know from beforehand that both these measures have good responsible gambling effects. Last but not least, to keep track of the bigger picture, we also need player health approximated for all players over time and keeping track of this. So at Svenska Spel, we do this by tracking rates of low, medium, and high-risk gambling week by week. We measure risk using our player tracking system. It's called PlayScan. And PlayScan in its core uses gambling data to predict the risk of experiencing negative consequences of gambling. So to the question of thresholds, I mean, we use thresholds at various levels. At medium risk levels and increasing risk levels, we increase player communication. If the players accumulate high losses over time, or if we have reason to believe that there is gambling problems, we try to reach the player with a counseling phone call. And at the very end of the spectrum, we stop the gambling and make an investigation to make sure that the player is not playing for laundering money or borrowed money or having gambling problems for that matter. So, I mean, it's with the increase of risk, we do more and more. And of course, we also invite researchers to evaluate as well.
Thank you. And I just want to take the opportunity to remind our viewers, please do send in your questions, because at the end of the panel, we're going to have about 5 minutes where I'll be posing your questions. So, Richard, listening to all of this, I mean, you're also a sportsman per se, and as we know, sports, a lot of people love to be engaged in sports and the excitement, but there is a counter side, of course, in the long term with potential addiction. What's your understanding, listening to the discussions now, what are the warning signals you believe are the most important for operators and the gambling industry to be on the watch out for this sort of preventive mode?
Yeah, I think it's two things actually that I would say based on just my experience and time spent gambling is one, and the number of deposits is another. Because myself, when I was gambling a lot of time. It was a huge amount of time I spent by my computer gambling. So if you see a change in behavior for like, if some person gambles 2 hours a week and makes one deposit, and that's starting to grow, that a sign that maybe here we should make a phone call and start a discussion and educate them that you are not doing what you used to do. So how can we make that person reflect on his or her own behavior? Like, I'm not doing what I did for 3 months ago. Maybe I should take a step back. And also, which I think is really important, that in this situation, they have to give good information, research what is happening in the brain. Why are you keep moving the deposits from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or the time from 1 hour to 10 hours? Or if you start to gamble at night, let's say 1, 2 hours, and then it goes into the time that you work. So that's two things that I think would be on the lookout for to come in with prevention.
Yeah. Anders, so speaking of time, deposit, and also, educating maybe or incentivizing the consumer about the behavioral change. What's your take? Did you agree with that? Is that how research is also moving forward?
Yes, I very much agree. And it's very true that in gambling, we know quite well what the early signs are. And online gambling in modern times makes it possible also to use that knowledge. That wasn't possible it wasn't so easy to use before, when gambling was a land-based activity to a larger extent. But now we can see the data when it happens, and we know what are those measures. We know relatively well how to separate a person with a developing gambling problem from a person who gambles without a likely problem. So yes, I very much agree, and it's that's the track we need to be on to keep on evidence-based, keep on working on evidence-based methods.
And just tying back to what you talked about, also having the cultural perspectives in mind, are there any examples around in the world talking about, the measurements when it comes to problem gambling that Sweden maybe can adhere to or sort of look out for? Are there anyone who is at the forefront?
There are good initiatives, definitely, but I also, I really think this is an area where we need to work on our own setting. Of course, we can't have one separate method for each country, but I think we have, in Sweden, we have a somewhat different picture in gambling problems than many other countries. We have a very online-based market, and in the patients that I see in our facility, rapid online gambling is so strong, predominating among those seeking treatment. So I think our market is to some extent a bit different. We need some national Swedish methods for that as well.
And back to you, Axel, just shortly, how do you use the advances that are now sort of surfacing within research in your everyday work? I mean, incorporating new lessons, new tools, and so forth.
Well, Sabinia, I say that research provides us with an abundance of new ideas for responsibility initiatives. Just to give a few examples, we use extensively motivational interviewing, which is a technique that our responsible gambling counselors use to help customers reflect and make responsible use of responsible gambling tools on their own terms. We have, for example, of our own development, we have developed a test that's called Do You Gamble More Than Others, that builds on scientific studies into the positive effects of social norms on the individuals who overconsume gambling or alcohol, for example. We have made extensive use of nudge techniques, which we find very suitable for responsible gambling messages. We often find pre-commitment strategies very useful for as a strategist to stay control and so on. So there's really a wealth of research in behavioral sciences, not least, even though the gambling, responsible gambling field is quite young, so that we could take inspiration from.
So really initiating that collaboration, having a unified measurement system, the importance of research to really also find preventative methods. Richard, sort of concluding before I take audience questions, is there anything else that you'd like to add that the gambling industry really needs to, have top of mind when it comes to prevention and so forth?
I think it's been said by everyone that I think that if we can work together as an industry, we're going to help a lot more people if we work separately.
And that is key, I think, to all industries. The sense of being collaborative and co-creational is so important, and having dialogues and really, unifying dialogues like this. So speaking of dialogue, we've had sort of an interactive dialogue with you, the viewers. I hope you find the conversation really interesting and relevant so far. We're sort of coming to the conclusion of the panel, so I'm going to take your questions. But let's just take a look at the last viewer question, which was, should gambling companies regularly account for the share of revenues from problem gambling? And 100%, wow, that is a majority that says yes. So that is also concluding all of our discussions here. So we're all in resonance there. Let's take now some panel questions from the audience, because we have an active audience, which is great. So I'm just going to fire off the questions, and anyone who feels that they can answer it, please do short and brief, because I want to take as many questions as I can. So the first one is, what is the risk for problem gamblers turning to unlicensed operators if the licensed operators increase their efforts on stopping problem gambling? Anyone who wants to catch that one?
Yeah, I can start with that. I think the risk is around consumer protection, because they would not have the same tools in place. But from our end, what we need to do is to make consumer protection as part and parcel of your relationship, of what you expect. Something that I usually try to use as a metaphor, for example, with my team, is that we know that when we go to the airport, we don't really like the security part. We don't really like the fact that we have to remove our belt and open our suitcases, but we understand that we wouldn't want it any other way. And I think that's a shift that we're seeing. And if we could focus more on proactivity, so not just time, for example, but also before, time is one of the really important stuff. So before people start depositing, for example, we started looking into web activity. If someone is just going on to set a limit and they don't. So as proactive as you can be, the customer will also be happy and trust the operator.
And I think trust is such a valid commodity in these days. So probably that is also really valid to point out. Okay, the next question. Having more than 60 companies on the regulated market, doesn't looking at one's company's data give a fragmented picture? Axel?
Well, I can try and answer that, and of course it does. I mean, we see. I have the option and to work with Placecam for several different operators, and we see that the predictions we do are better if we have a bigger size of the wallet. But then again, as using as an early detection system, it works well enough, and there are some kind of behaviors, as Rika pointed out, for example. Doing a lot of deposits in one session is such a risky behavior that we know it doesn't matter if you play at different operators. That's a sign as well. And there are nighttime gambling and so on, chasing losses, and these kind of indicators that we can find, even if the gambler has gameplay on many different operators.
Yeah. So once again, the behavioral changes that come up. Going on with audience questions, does research in problem gambling need individual player data, or is aggregated data sufficient? Maybe that's one for you, Anders? Or Marit?
I think it needs both, but I would like to emphasize the need for individual data. I mean, data that actually measure one individual's gambling pattern, and where an intervention very closely related to that can also follow. So I think we can't only rely on aggregated year-by-year data, for example, but we have to use individual measuring and individual interventions.
And is it possible to help serious problem gamblers to gamble responsibly, or is it a matter of stopping them completely? I think, Richard, I'd like your take on that.
I think you can do both. Some players if the player does not want to quit playing, the player won't stop. But if you can reach the player at some level and they start to make actions to improve their gambling habits, I think it's possible, but it's really hard for a player who is really an addict to just, rewind and start playing responsible again. So it's not impossible, but it's hard, I would say. So in those cases, I think Anders put it really good with the
individual.
Yeah, precisely. So we all gamble for different reasons. Also, when we're addicts, we gamble for different reasons. So I would say yes, but it's really tough.
Yeah. And if we'd had more time, I would have loved to dive into what kind of messaging, in your experience, is really, good messaging for people who are sort of in that addictive behavior. But that's for another panel, because I want to try and get one more audience question. And that is, what expectations can we have on increased collaboration within the industry on counteracting problem gambling, which I think we've concluded a bit. But someone want to take that? What expectations can we have? I think we can have good ones. Maris, what do you think?
I think by collaborating, we can really offer a better product, more trust, and better prevention. So I think it's the only way to go at this point.
Yeah. And the last question from the audience, what is the biggest challenge in scientific research on problem gambling? Maybe Anders or Axel?
There are always challenges, but I think I wouldn't exaggerate those. We are a relatively young research field, and there are a lot of opportunities as well. There are a lot of good things that we can do. So I wouldn't. Yes, there are challenges. Human behavior is difficult to measure, and intervention is difficult. But I wouldn't exaggerate the difficulties, really.
No, and it's always good to have a solution-orientated mindset, because that's how we actually create possibilities. I want to really thank all of you, all of my panelists. Thank you for sharing your insights and knowledge, and for also all the work that you do in really working with both research and prevention methods, and also creating more space for dialogue and conversation. So the best of luck. Stay safe and healthy, all of you. And I also want to say thank you to all of our viewers who are so engaged in sending in questions. It's now time to summarize and have a conclusion about today, and also maybe look a bit further in the future. And with that, I welcome back Patrick and Sarah. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So interesting conversations, don't you think? Any sort of key takeaways or summaries that you'd like to share after listening, Patrick?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, what I'm taking with me now for today's session is actually the need for extended collaboration and learning not only among the industry as such. It's a broader perspective. We include the research, all the operators, but the broader part of the industry as well, to better understand, so we can improve the prevention of the harmful gambling. So that is really one takeaway. The other one is, I'm happy also that we have this discussion today, that we are more transparent, that we work together in the sector again about the collaboration to improve. And I saw a big step change, since the new gambling market started in 1st of January 2019 with a new regulation. That was a step up, I see it continues to step up now, and I'm really happy to see that. And then, of course, among the operators as well, we heard Kindred today. I'm happy, see the work that they are doing as well, and that we are doing at Svenska Spel and many others, how we can actually learn and improve the tools that we are using. So we have a bigger transparency around that as well. So I think I'm very happy, I must say, that when hearing and listening into this. I mean, at the end of the day, we want to create a better market, get better sector industry as such for sustainability, both in long and in the short term. So I'm happy to hear the discussion and to following it.
And like you said, collaboration is so important.
Yes. Sarah, what's your?
Well, I'm very excited actually, because I hear a lot about evidence-based decisions, which it's critical to make the right decision in terms of moving on and also create this safe environment. But I must say that the most exciting parts of the discussion was when we heard from an actual gamer and also talking about this early detection. What I hear is actually help me stop before it's too late. And also that gamers play for various reasons. It could be from a behavior context, it could be for reducing anxiety, it could be that you seek excitement. So how can we personalize also this support that these people need? And I also believe that we need to actually see these people that have problems with gambling, and it's actually affecting their lives. It's affecting their families. It could be a really critical condition. So I'm very happy to hear this perspective also in this discussion. And I think that's what we need to have in focus going forward, the patient or the person who's actually affected by this. And that should also design how we set the standards for the future.
Very true. Thank you for sharing that. Patrick, any final words from you?
Yes, finally, of course, I want to thank the panel, all participants for today's discussion, and also Sabine, you, for leading us through this discussion, and but also, of course, all the people that are listening in to today's discussion. And well, let's work together now and make this gambling market enjoyable and entertaining going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, also for the work that you do. And with that, I also want to express my thank yous to all of the panelists, to everyone who's participated, and of course to all of our viewers for your engagement. We really do hope that this has been a relevant and interesting conversation that I'm sure will continue. And remembering that it truly is through transparency, conversation, knowledge transfer, and above all collaboration that the responsible gambling work and research can have ripple effects and really contribute to a better society. And with that, I just want to say stay safe, stay healthy, and see you next time.